Welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. Today we're going to be reviewing The Departed by Martin Scorsese. Now, this is a really interesting case study where I feel like the movie was almost hurt because it won the Oscar. It's a strange situation where not because the movie was considered bad or undeserving, this wasn't like a Green Book situation, but it's because when you look at Martin Scorsese's filmography and you realize that this is the one that won him Best Picture and Best Director, almost across the board, cinephiles' reaction is,
"What, are you fucking retarded or something? That ain't fucking right."
And because of that, the movie's been kind of weirdly maligned. I do think over the years, that criticism has softened and people have more warmed up to it and come to appreciate it. But still, it's an interesting legacy that this movie was kind of mocked for a long time for finally winning Scorsese his Oscars.
The rat symbolizes obviousness.
And I get it, this is one of his more commercial movies, it's not one of his really personal classics. This is a remake of a Hong Kong action film at that. The plot does have a lot of contrivances and some weird coincidence in it. It is kind of a sloppy story. Really, he should have won for Raging Bull or Goodfellas a long time before this. Raging Bull losing to Ordinary People is especially egregious. But goddamn, put everything else aside, and this movie is so entertaining. This whole thing to me feels almost like Scorsese is just like one rail of coke away from grabbing the camera and yelling right at the audience, "Are you not entertained?" Yeah, we are, Martin. Calm down. This was one of the best films to come out of this year. One of the best films to come out in the 2000s period, I think. It is aged incredibly well. It is one of the most rewatchable 2.5-hour movies you can see. I think it was very deserving to win the year it came out. And I think it is not one of Scorsese's like top tier, but it's just below that. But it's a damn good movie. And sometimes I hear people accuse this of kind of being Scorsese just replaying some of his greatest hits. And to some extent I get that. Like, this is the third movie where he uses Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones. But I think he actually does a lot of things to make this movie feel very, very different than the rest of his crime dramas, which really helps it stand out positively in his filmography. Now, to address kind of the setup of this movie, we have Leo DiCaprio as Bill Castigan, who is a cop that gets assigned to go undercover and infiltrate Frank Costello's gang. And then we have Matt Damon, who is a kid that grew up kind of raised by Frank Costello, and he goes and becomes a cop to spy on Costello's part. So we basically have two different moles, two different rats. We have a rat in the gang working for the police, and we have a rat in the police working for the gang. And it's such a great setup where these two characters are constantly in very high stakes situations where they are trying to do their jobs well enough that they don't get caught while undercutting things, while reporting back to the people they're working with. As the movie goes on, the stakes just keep elevating. And pretty early on, both organizations realize they have a rat inside. So the rats are looking for each other. And it creates just this constant tension. From about the first 10 minutes of the movie to the very end, you just can like never unclench. You can never relax. People are constantly in danger. People are constantly going off and making little mistakes. And it is just such a wild thrill ride to sit through. Now, in fairness, I have not seen the original Infernal Affairs Hong Kong film that this movie was based off of. I know that this one is about an hour longer, and I've heard from people who have seen it that is much more of a just straight up cops and robbers thriller, and that the ending is different, which if you know how this movie ends and you know about kind of Chinese censorship laws, that's not at all surprising. I also know that Jack Nicholson's character is at least partially based off of Whitey Bulger, who was a real life criminal, and that clearly shapes both his performance and the way the character is written. So even if there are scenes with the same dialogue, even if there are certain sequences that are like a shot-for-shot remake, because I've heard that's true also, I still think this overall package must be quite a bit different than what originally came out, and it deserves to stand on its own merits. And frankly, so many movies are, if not flat-out remakes, adaptations inspired by, based on something else. Even like Goodfellas is based off of a book about Henry Hill's real life. So it's not like this is the first time Scorsese's looked to other sources for inspiration. Now, to talk about how this film is different from Scorsese's other crime dramas. First, there's the fact that we really do have two protagonists in here who we split the film pretty evenly between. Granted, this is not the first time that Scorsese has had multiple POV characters. Goodfellas and Casino both have different different characters giving voiceover narration. But even in those movies, it's very clear who our lead is. It's very clear who the main protagonist is. In this case, you could really make an argument for either Leo or Damon being the primary protagonist. And then one of the tricks of this movie is that we are constantly cutting back and forth between them. We rarely get more than 2, maybe 3 minutes at most with one of them before we're cutting back to the other one. There's plenty of extended scenes where it's literally like 30 seconds one character, 30 seconds another character. And then there's even times where we cut away from them to show the antics that Jack Nicholson's Frank is getting up to. And so as a result of that, the pacing of this movie is insane. In my review last week of Gangs of New York, I talked about that movie having pacing issues and talking about how Scorsese has proven he can do really good fast pacing in other movies like Goodfellas and Wolf of Wall Street. This might be even more fast paced than them. In those movies, we have decades of storyline being crammed into a 2.5 to 3.5 hour window. Whereas this movie, they're not super clear about the timeline, but it seems to be over the case of like 1 to 2 years. I don't think it goes much longer than that. But those movies are also largely focused on a single character's journey. Whereas this one, like I said, is cutting back and forth between multiple. So it's almost like getting 2 movies at once. This is in some ways a little closer to Godfather 2 in its structure, but way more fast-paced and more evenly balanced between the two sides. This is also the only Scorsese movie that really shows us the cops side of things. Now, granted, our main character in The Police is corrupt. He is a criminal himself. But we do see plenty of non-criminal, clean cops as well. And we do have several sympathetic cop characters. And this is kind of the only movie Scorsese has done where he shows that side of the law. He's usually focused clearly on the criminals. And so that back and forth does help create just a really morally gray world. I love the line that Jack Nicholson has early on about,
When I was your age, they would say we could become cops or criminals. Today, what I'm saying is this. Facing a loaded gun. What's the difference?
that's really what this movie's playing with, showing the duality and weird similarities between the criminals and the police, who are in many ways living outside of normal laws, trying to stop them. This is also Scorsese's only movie set in Boston, I believe. A lot of his crime dramas are set in New York, and even the ones not set directly in New York, like Casino and The Irishman, still heavily feature New York-based actors like De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino in The Irishman. And so they all have a very New York feel to them, regardless of where they are. This is one of the few movies that doesn't do that. He really leans into this being a Boston movie, and that alone gives it a bit of a different feeling than most of his filmography. I also have to say, I'm not an expert at cameras or lighting by far. I'm still working on getting my own lighting set up here, although I think I've improved it if you've seen a few of my previous videos. But there's just something about the way this movie looks. I know it was filmed on film in an era where people were more and more switching to digital, so I'm sure that's part of it. There's a crispness to the coloring. It doesn't really seem to be tinted any specific color. It's very kind of clean across the board, natural, but just very clear, crisp looking. I don't know. Again, this is not my area of expertise. I'm here more for the writing and acting, but there is something about this movie that just looks and feels on a visual level very different than the rest of Scorsese's films. And I can really get lost just looking at this movie, just watching it unfold. And then finally, without spoiling it, this movie is largely known for the ending. It kind of has a infamous shock twist ending. And all Scorsese's other crime dramas, they definitely have big shocking moments throughout them, but they're really not known for like a gotcha ending like this one is. This one, the last like 5 to 10 minutes is just pure
What the fuck? What the fuck?
And it gives it just such a different feel at the end credits than I have from any of his other films. So for all those reasons, yeah, this is a Scorsese crime drama, but it really stands out and feels just so different from his other ones. Now I gotta talk about the actors a bit. Leo, first off, is Bill Costigan, is fantastic in this role overall. I mentioned in my previous review on Gangs of New York that I really don't buy Leo as a tough guy actor. I think that's something where he's sometimes miscast. But overall in this movie, he's actually less of that than I remembered him being. He's really much more of just a very troubled guy in an impossible situation, dealing with stress and anxieties that most of us can barely imagine. The word I keep thinking about with him is vulnerable more often than not. Like, he's just in such a complicated situation, and when we do see him alone, he's just such a wreck of a character. Not since Travis Bickle have I seen a Scorsese character that just feels much like he's just crawling out of his skin. There is one scene where he beats up two guys at once that I call bullshit on. I don't really believe that. But even his violent outbursts for the most parts are either intentional in character things he has to do to integrate himself into the game, or they're very kind of understandable mistakes that he's making while just living on the edge. Then we have Matt Damon as Sullivan, who's Frank's mole, and he's a really fascinating character to watch. He's charming, he's intelligent, he really does feel like a cop. He has a very authentic cop attitude. But even in his private life, he's usually with Madeline, a cop psychiatrist who he meets and starts dating early on into the movie. So we very, very rarely see him on his own. And when we do, like in the scene where he buys his condo, for instance, kind of just comes across as a dead-eyed creep. He's a guy who really is giving a performance within a performance.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude. What?
Well, maybe not to that level, but still, it's pretty crazy. Also, I should throw out, there are lots of theories that his character may be gay. I think there are some subtle hints in the movie that he is, but you don't really know. That's just an interesting idea to play with next time you watch this movie, whether his character might low-key be gay or not. Then we have Vera Farmiga as Madeline, the cop psychiatrist I just mentioned, who not only does she start dating Matt Damon early on, but she also sees Leo, the undercover cop, as a patient, and so she gets involved in both of these guys' lives in interesting ways. Now, I will say that both of our moles in any way being associated with the same woman is kind of a contrivance. It is something that makes me say, really, really. But the movie does enough interesting things with the dynamics that I can forgive it. And she is fantastic as this character. She's very, very charming. She's very likable. And frankly, her character is someone who makes so many mistakes. She does almost everything wrong. She could very, very easily come across as just a really unlikable or really incompetent type of person. But with the way she handles her, she feels intelligent and human and just someone who is making some bad choices, unfortunately. For a psychiatrist, she is pretty bad at recognizing red flags. I'm then getting to the cop characters. First, we have Mark Wahlberg as Dignam, and this is one of his most legendary roles. He is perfect as kind of the bad cop of this group, as this just pure Boston boy asshole. He has so many great memorable lines.
I'm the guy who does his job. You must be the other guy.
Every moment he's on screen is wildly entertaining. Although I will say, when you realize he's the only actor who got an Oscar nomination for this, I do just kind of feel like,
That ain't fucking right.
not that he didn't deserve a nod, but I'm just saying how he got a nomination over Jack Nicholson is something I'll never understand. But hey, good for him getting the nomination. He is very, very entertaining, even if his long hair is kind of weird and unfortunate. Then we have Martin Sheen as Queenan, who is very much the good cop to Mark Wahlberg's bad cop. And he's really, really nice as kind of this concerned dad figure. I will say there were a lot of castings in this movie that changed from their original plans, and this character was originally supposed to be played by Robert De Niro. And I do really wish that had happened, because having this be kind of a passing of the torch from De Niro to DiCaprio, from Scorsese's first muse to his new muse, in a crime drama no less, would have been really, really nice and fitting, and would have made a few moments, a few interactions between them mean more and hit a bit harder. But we did eventually get that pair up in Killers of the Flower Moon, so that wrong was righted eventually. And Martin Sheen is very good as this character and what he has. Just interesting to think about what could have been. And then we have Alec Baldwin as Ellerby, who's another one of the cops, who kind of takes a shine to Matt Damon's character. Seems to be almost more of like his cop dad in a way. And he, again, does another good job of playing a guy who's a bit of an asshole, but still ultimately a pretty decent guy. Kind of an in between, not good cop, not bad cop, more of an ideal balance in between them. He doesn't get a ton to do with this movie, but he does have some nice moments, and he's just a good presence there. Very believable as this character for sure. Then on the criminal side, we have Ray Winston as Mr. French, who is Jack Nicholson's right-hand man, and he's like the ideal guy in that sort of role. He's, reasonably intelligent, not too smart, but smart enough for sure. He's loyal, he's reliable, he is not afraid to get his hands dirty. He's also terrifying. He is a guy who can just stare off into space while Jack Nicholson is waggling around a severed hand. And he is just such a strong presence and is wonderful as this character. And then last but not least, we have the man I keep alluding to, Jack Nicholson as Frank Costello. And this is such a wild performance from him. By now his improv antics are kind of legendary.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
he just went off script in so many ways. For example, the hand, that wasn't in the script. That concern we're seeing on Leo's face is very, very real. And that's just one example. There are so many scenes throughout this movie where you can just feel the tension as the actors themselves genuinely have no idea what he's about to do or what he's about to say. And I cannot choose between him or Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York. They are both wonderful, wonderful villains. Whereas Bill the Butcher, he's a wild man, but he's also a man of honor and principles. Costello is just a pure degenerate. He is just a pure wild card. You don't know what he's going to do other than it's going to be something to serve his own interests some way. He is terrifying and hilarious in equal measure. He steals every moment of screen time he has. His energy just influences this movie so much, and how he did not get an Oscar nomination for this is something I will never understand. It's almost like these little awards don't even matter in the long run. If I'm going to give one note here, I do kind of hate that his name is Costello and Leo's character's name is Costigan. I keep getting those names confused when I watch this movie. I think maybe it's symbolic to illustrate their kind of father-son dynamic that develops. But yeah, it is kind of confusing. I wish they would have given them slightly different names. But minor note aside, it does nothing to diminish the performances at all. Also, I want to make a note on the title itself I find really interesting. So, The Departed has a double meaning. The first very obvious meaning is the dearly departed, the dead. And in a movie that has a pretty high body count, that's a very appropriate title for sure. But then beyond that, there's another meaning that I think a lot of people don't catch. Very early on, when Dignam is grilling Leo in this interview to see if he can hold up to the pressures of being undercover or not, he keeps talking about all of these relatives he has who themselves were criminals. And while talking about them, he uses the phrase departures from normative behavior to describe their criminal activities. But when you think about it that way, just someone who departs from normative behavior, someone who acts differently, someone who lives outside the lines. That applies to basically all of the important characters in this movie. Even the police who are doing their jobs are still kind of living outside the law. They're still putting themselves in very dangerous life and death situations and often bending the rules a little bit to try and catch who they perceive to be the real bad guys. So that's just kind of an interesting double meaning to consider next time you watch this movie. So in conclusion, yeah, this movie is not perfect. Like I said, the plot is kind of sloppy. You do have to buy some barely only in a movie unrealistic moments, but it's so entertaining and I don't even care. This is such a unique crime drama, both in Scorsese's filmography and just in general. It is one of the funnest movies. For a movie that is this brutal and gritty, it is so goddamn fun and entertaining, and I highly recommend it. It's a classic that has aged very well, and I think will continue to age well into the future. So that's our review today. If you watched this whole thing, I really do thank you for taking the time. If you could leave a like and subscription, it really, really helps this channel get off the ground. And I'll see you guys next time. Until then, stay sane. Stay human.